look, it's a picture I took of you the first time I ever came here. Ah, look at you, so young and happy. Where do the years go?
Hello everyone, my name is Nadia Lee Owens, and if you're new, welcome to Bi Black and Bookish, a booktube channel where a bi black girl who reads too much is constantly obsessing over the fictional death of a fictional character. And I am of course referring to the infamous story arc of Batman, Death in the Family, where Robin 2, aka Jason Todd, gets brutally murdered by the Joker. I got the collection for Christmas, and it also included the follow-up story arc, A Lonely Place of Dying, which introduces the next Robin, Tim Drake. I will not be reviewing that because while I love all Robins equally, I do not much care for Tim Drake. I do kind of like the fact that he's a little freak, but he's just not my favorite. For a bit of background before we get into the summary, in 1983, Jason Todd was introduced as the replacement to Dick Grayson. The original and arguably probably the most favored Robin, who got introduced in 1940. At first, the audience seemed okay with Jason. I think mainly because he had a very similar background to Dick. He was raised in the circus as an acrobat whose parents got murdered, and then he became Robin. But then in Crisis on Infinite Earths rebooted DC, so the writers took the opportunity to revamp Jason's story to what most people are now familiar with. Now Jason was a homeless youth who tried to steal tires off the Batmobile, and that's how he became Robin. And people apparently did not like this new Jason, and neither did the Batman writer Jim Starlin. Starlin hated Jason and suggested killing him at any opportunity that he got. Imagine being a grown man with beef with a fictional character. It's a bit embarrassing. But then the sick bastard finally got his chance in 1988. And if you couldn't tell by now, Jim Starlin is my mortal enemy. I'm going to whoop his ass. The first issue of this story arc, Batman 426, released in late August 1988, opened with Batman and Robin taking down a CP ring. And right off the bat, this is so much darker than what most people would expect from old comics. The reason for that was because this was the 80s, and I don't know if it was the cocaine or just something in the water, but creatives, comic book writers especially, were kind of collectively losing their mind, and it marked a shift to darker and edgier storylines. For reference, The Killing Joke came out around this time. And listen, gals, gays, and theys, if a man tells you his favorite comic story is The Killing Joke, run to the hills. He is crazy. So Robin seems to be moody and uses excessive force, which Batman doesn't seem to like. I personally would argue that being moody is being a teenager, and there's no such thing as an excessive force against pedophiles, but that's just my opinion. Bruce expresses his concerns to Alfred and decides to bench Jason. Jason overhears this and runs off upset, ignoring Bruce's attempts to talk about his unresolved trauma surrounding his parents. It was a bit of a surprise reading Bruce actually kind of initiating an emotional conversation, because the Batman I'm used to now would never do that. He's just so emotionally limited, I guess you could say. At the same time, elsewhere, Joker has escaped Arkham once again, and because the government seized most of his assets, the Joker decides to sell his secret missile because apparently the government is so bad at their goddamn job, they missed on the fact that the Joker had a secret missile. Back to Jason, he walked all the way back to his old apartment where he lived with his parents, Catherine and Willis Todd, whose parents have a different story than what is known now. In post-crisis, the canon for this story arc, Catherine was a loving and diligent mom who died of an unspecified disease. And while Willis was a henchman for Two-Face, it was implied that he did it out of love for his family, and it was really the only way he could find to support them. In New 52, however, Catherine was an addict who OD'd, and Willis was portrayed as your typical criminal scum. I think the reason for this change was not only to make Jason's backstory edgier and darker, which just seems to be the way a lot of Batman stories specifically are, but also just to make kind of Batman seem not that bad as a parent figure in comparison. You only need to read Red Hood and the Outlaws issue 25 to get a taste of Bruce's not so stellar parenting skills. So at Jason's old apartment building, he is flagged down by an old neighbor who kept a box of old stuff for Jason. When Jason gets back to the manor, he finds the birth certificate where the mother's name is smudged but clearly starts with an S rather than a C for Catherine. Using his detective skills and Willis's old phone book, because it was the 80s, Jason can narrow down a list of 3 women that could possibly be his mother, all of them abroad. Meanwhile, Batman has tracked down clues that the Joker is headed to Lebanon. When he comes back to the cave, he is told by Alfred that Jason had run away. Bruce decides to chase Joker rather than, quote-unquote, live up to his responsibilities as the boy's guardian. And there he is, the piece of shit father figure I know and despise. Batman travels to Lebanon, and while there, he gets an update from Alfred that Jason took a flight to Israel. There, Jason breaks into an Israeli government building to gather information on his first possible mother, Charmin Rosen, Israeli secret agent. Both Bruce and Jason's investigations lead them to Beirut. Both of their targets are found together, so Bruce and Jason agree to work together. They follow them to where Joker was selling the missile to terrorists and manage to foil the deal with Charmin's help. Afterward, they ask her if she has ever been to Gotham, but she says no. Batman issue 427, published in early September, finds Batman and Jason have moved on to the next woman on Jason's list, Shiva Woosan, also known as Lady Shiva. They find out that Shiva has seemingly been kidnapped, so they go after her. Turns out it was a fake kidnapping, and she was actually hired to train this group. Batman and Robin defeat Lady Shiva in combat. Once they have her restrained, they ask her if she ever had a baby. At first, she lies and says yes. But after dosing her with truth serum, she confesses she hadn't. Now, in the current canon, Lady Shiva saying yes would be the truth because she is the mother of Cassandra Cain, aka Batgirl, Orphan, Black Bat. And Cass is estimated to be around the same age as Jason, maybe a little younger or almost like the exact same age. It would have been interesting if Shiva actually was Jason's mother, because Cass seemingly does not really like Jason. I guess I wouldn't say doesn't like him, but more along the lines doesn't really understand why he does the things that he does. Because Cass was raised to be a killer by both of her parents, but when she was sent off to her first kill, she decided killing was wrong and would never do it again. This was a conclusion that Cass reached on her own outside of Batman's influence. On the other hand, Jason as Red Hood does not have a no killing rule, despite the fact that he was personally trained by Bruce. So that's kind of the source of tension between them. And also, there's one panel that implies that Jason actually is kind of scared shitless by her, which I do really love. Meanwhile, Joker has traveled to Ethiopia and meets the third and final candidate to be Jason's mother, Sheila Haywood. Joker blackmails her for medical supplies that he can sell to terrorist groups. Bruce and Jason go to the refugee camp where Sheila works, and Sheila, upon hearing Jason's full name, recognizes him. And then there's this like heartbreaking panel where Jason runs in Sheila's arms and cries, "Mother, mother, mother." And I'm like, my boy, I wish I could protect you. Bruce leaves them alone that she left to go to England to study soon after Jason was born. And Willis was supposed to follow, but he ended up falling in love with another woman, Catherine. So Sheila just gave up custody. But I'm over here thinking, why not still visit him? My suspicions is she never really wanted a baby to begin with, which is why as soon as she had him, she just kind of fucked off to Europe. After their talk, Jason notices Joker entering his mother's tent, so he eavesdrops and finds out she is being extorted to help him in replacing the medicine for the refugees with Joker's laughing gas. Jason runs to tell Bruce. Batman goes to chase the convoy, but before doing so, tells Jason to stay put until he gets back. Jason, of course, does not do that. He confronts Sheila and reveals that he is Robin so he can help her. And she immediately sells him out to Joker. Joker and his goons proceed to beat Jason up, most notably with the crowbar, all while Sheila is in the background smoking a cigarette. To get rid of the evidence of what he's done to Robin, Joker leaves Sheila and Robin in the warehouse with a bomb. With his last bit of strength, Robin unties Sheila, but the door was locked. Right when Batman comes back from stopping the convoy, the warehouse blows up. Before publishing the next Batman issue, DC held a poll to see if Jason would live or die between September 15th and 16th. It was essentially like a publicity stunt inspired by an SNL skit done by Eddie Murphy in 1982. Fans would call two different phone numbers to cast their votes, and in the end, only a slim majority voted for Jason dying, the difference being only 72 votes. To me, this kind of proves that fans didn't really hate Jason as much as people now say they did. It was even rumored that most of the killing votes came from one person who programmed their Macintosh to call the killing number over and over. And I am, of course, going to blame Jim Starlin for this. I read that he was apparently in Mexico during this time, but it was still his fault. So Batman issue 428, published October 18th, opens with Batman going through the wreckage, searching for Jason, all while remembering how alone he was after Dick left and before he found Jason trying to steal the wheels off the Batmobile, and how they became the new dynamic duo. Batman first finds Sheila, and with her last breath, she tells him everything about the Joker and how Jason tried to save her. Finally, Batman finds Jason's body, already getting code. Then there's this iconic splash page where Batman's holding Jason's corpse in amongst the wreckage, and it makes me cry every time. Bruce takes their bodies back to Gotham, where he buries them and holds a private funeral, the only other attendants being Jim Gordon, Barbara Gordon, and Alfred. But before Bruce left back to the States, Joker left Batman a message to meet at 42nd and 1st. Batman deduces that it refers to the United Nations headquarters in New York. Batman goes there fueled by grief and rage with the full intent of taking down the Joker, maybe even breaking his sacred no-kill rule. But he is stopped by Superman. I think if Bruce told Jason that this happened, like he was about to avenge his son's death, but then Superman stopped him, I think Jason wouldn't have been as pissed as he was, and instead maybe would have just been chasing around Superman with kryptonite bullets. But the reason why Superman is protecting the Joker is so ridiculous. I read a review where someone described it as camp, but camp is a little bit more lighthearted. It's more funny. This was just absolutely ridiculous. So it turned out that the Joker had been appointed as the Iranian ambassador to the UN and was personally sought out by the leader of Iran at the time. DC actually drew a panel of the real life Iranian leader, Rahul Khomeini. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But it's so stupid in my opinion. It's so, what the fuck? The conclusion of Death in the Family, Batman issue 429, was published November 29th. And because I find it so ridiculous, I'm just kind of going to speed through it. Joker gives a speech at the UN with Bruce watching in the audience about how he and the current leaders of Iran are so similar. Joker also mentions that he's a victim of Reaganomics, and I'm like, so what? It's been nearly like 40 years and we're still victims of Reaganomics. You're not special. Also, if anyone complains about how they're putting politics in comics nowadays, just point them to this. Politics have always been a constant influence on all sorts of arts, and I think comics especially, because I think half of them have always kind of been like propaganda in a little bit, or if not a straight up PSA. DC and Marvel did like a whole bunch of them between like the 70s and the 90s. After the speech, Joker releases a toxic gas, but Superman was undercover in the audience, so he just sucked the gas up. Joker runs, Batman chases, but ultimately Joker disappears, which according to Batman leaves things the way it always ends with them, unresolved. And that's the end of Death in the Family. While I hate Jim Starlin, we've been over this multiple times by now, and I will be kicking his ass in an empty Waffle House parking lot. I do think he wrote a pretty good yet ending for Jason Todd, other than the whole Iranian ambassador bit. That was unnecessary. Most comic book fans blame the Jason's death on Jason because he just couldn't follow Batman's orders. And for me personally, I think his inability to follow Batman's orders is the reason why I think he is a good Robin. I think that's kind of quintessential Robin behavior, because Jason went after Sheila not to be rebellious or anything, but he went to go find her so he can like save her, so he can be the hero, so he can be Robin. And, you know, because Robin gives you magic, an actual thing that little Jason Todd said. I think that every other Robin has been known for kind of directly disobeying Batman's orders. Even Tim Drake, who is kind of known as being the one as a perfect Robin, I guess you can say, even he kind of directly ignoring Batman's orders. Even in his introduction, when Batman says, no, you can't be, there will be no Royal Robins. You need to stay here and stay out of my way. Tim does what he thinks is right, because that's kind of what being Robin is all about. I think the reason why fans didn't like Jason, especially at the time, was because he acted more like an actual teenager dealing with trauma would, rather than a perfect little soldier. Overall, I would rate it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I will be keeping the rest of my thoughts on Jason Todd to myself, because I am planning on making a rant / video essay on him sometime in April. Well, let me know if you've read Death in the Family, what your thoughts on it, and if you're going to be joining my Starlin Hate Club in the comments below, or let me know, talk to me on Twitter or Instagram at Nadia Owens. Hope to see you next time when I read an excerpt from Janelle Monáe's The Memory Librarian. Until next time, bye!